the beginning of his book, Ascent of Mount Carmel, St. John of the Cross provides us with his poem, Dark Night of the Soul. St. John tells us that what the poem says sums up everything that is in the book, Ascent of Mount Carmel. The book and the poem describe the path we must take to ascend the mount. And ascending the mount is a metaphor for achieving divine union with God. The poem was initially written by St. John independently of the book. Then a couple of years later, after writing the poem, he set out on writing a book to explain the poem. St. John starts to break down the first stanza of the poem, Ascent of Mount Carmel, in the first chapters of the book. But then he stops doing that, at least breaking it down specifically after a few chapters. However, as we read the book, we will have a little bit better understanding of the poem. Also, he's going to explain the poem more completely in the sequel to Ascent of Mount Carmel, which is a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And we'll discuss the book, Dark Night of the Soul, after we finish Ascent of Mount Carmel. St. John never actually seems to name his poem. However, others have named it Dark Night of the Soul, and this is probably because the poem is more fully explained in the book Dark Night of the Soul. The name of the book is associated with the poem. According to Wikipedia, the term Dark Night of the Soul in Roman Catholic spirituality describes a spiritual crisis in the journey toward union with God, like that described of St. John of the Cross. It also says that a dark night can be derived from doubt of the existence of eternity. As we read Ascent of Mount Carmel, we're going to see that St. John isn't really describing a spiritual crisis. And I wonder whether people who think of the term Dark Night of the Soul as a crisis have even read the book Ascent of Mount Carmel. The Dark Night of the Soul, as we shall read, is nothing like a spiritual crisis. It is the path that we must take to advance spiritually. As St. John tells us in future chapters, we need to darken ourselves, cut ourselves off from the bright lights of the world, hence the dark night. And we're darkening ourselves off to things of the senses and things of the spirit. To me, the poem Dark Night of the Soul is a little bit like one of the parables maybe told by Jesus, and it's almost impossible to understand it if it isn't explained. As far as the poetry itself, I'm not an expert on poems. To me, I don't recognize a poem as a poem unless it has a cat-in-the-hat Dr. Seuss rhyme and cadence. The poem was written in the 1500s and then translated into English, so the English version certainly doesn't rhyme. So I asked the members of the Ascent of Mount Carmel Facebook group to give me their general impressions about the poem. They agreed that the poem didn't seem to suggest anything of a spiritual crisis, but that the words, "My house is now at rest," suggests that only when a person's soul is at rest and in peace and in darkness, only then will they find light. Another member said that the poem reminds her of when Solomon wrote to his beloved in the Canticles of Solomon. Also the verse, "O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed into beloved," seems to suggest the essence of the imitation of Christ. I have the full text of the poem down below, so please feel free to read it. And please feel free to post your comments down below as to whether you disagree or not with the comments that we've made here. We'll be back again in about a week with another installment, but in the meantime, please check out the Ascent of Mount Carmel Facebook group, which is linked down below, and also please check out my Facebook page, also linked down below. And finally, please pray for the church.
Dark night, it's a dark night.